talking about, these sort of supranational organisations. We talk a lot about, the United Nations, NATO, the EU comes up an awful lot, but also, of course, the World Health Organization. Well, a lot of them are taking an awful lot more powers away from national sovereign governments. And now there's a bid to take away even more power in the event of a pandemic. Now, we, I think, in this country made an awful lot of mistakes, very similar to a lot of other mistakes that were made by other countries, following a totalitarian murderous state like China into lockdowns instead of doing what Sweden did, which was following pandemic planning and World Health Organization plans there. But there is now a move for a World Health Organization pandemic treaty superseding the laws of, wait for it, 194 countries signed up to the World Health Organization to tackle the next pandemic. So they will be telling us what to do, not our own governments deciding. Let's talk about this with public law barrister and anti-lockdown campaigner Francis Hoar. Good morning to you, Francis.
Good morning, Julia.
This is the sort of thing that you see on Twitter and you think, oh, there's another conspiracy theory going around. This is 100% something that is actually happening. We know that the EU, Council of the EU, is also, getting involved on all of this. World leaders have been calling for this pandemic treaty, this idea that you have this sort of one organisation giving advice to everybody on what to do, but not just advice, literally setting the laws in our country and elsewhere in the event of the next pandemic.
Yes, firstly, I think it's quite important just to explain to listeners the difference between international law, what's called international law, and domestic law. Now, unlike with the EU, certainly as it is currently framed, the international health regulations, which are imposed by the WHO, the World Health Organization, are a treaty obligation. So they make obligations on the United Kingdom as a country. They do not have force in law, save those provisions that were implemented in the Public Health Act. Yeah. And we've discussed that before. My view is they were misinterpreted. They didn't give nearly as wide powers as the courts have said that they did. But there we are. That's the difference. That's quite an important difference, because what is not being suggested at the moment is that we will automatically incorporate, as we did with the EU, going back to your previous issue, the law that is set by the WHO. But there are a number of significant problems with the proposals for this treaty. At the moment, they're only proposals. There's going to be a meeting in August. The United States have made some proposals in April. And indeed, there has been, before this, a detailed report by the review committee of the functioning of the international health regulations, which has actually gone into a lot of detail as to why they went wrong and how they should have been better followed. Yeah. Which suggests that there isn't actually any real need for this new treaty, which, as you rightly said, will give greatly enhanced powers to the Director General in particular and the Executive Committee of the WHO.
I mean, it was bad enough that we had to live under laws for an awful long time in this country, and you were always opposed to the laws. I wasn't so opposed in the first couple of months of the first lockdown, but came to my awakening a little bit later. But the idea that at least those laws were imposed by a government we had elected and a parliament we had a say over, and we are in a position now. Look, what we're seeing with Beergate and Partygate and all those things and elections, we get to have a say. We can say we're unhappy with what you've done. We can vote people out. We can campaign, we can pressure. We saw what happened with the COVID recovery group of MPs who effectively basically twisted Boris Johnson's arm in December last year not to go into more restrictions, where we're able to prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that you don't need to have restrictions on people's lives for the pandemic waves to go up and to go down. I mean, anyone who's denying that proof, frankly, ain't paying attention, is a dishonest actor in my view. But to have rules that are made by someone over there in Switzerland, the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, basically in cahoots with the Chinese government, the World Health Organization, which led to happily leading a cover-up of the original, where COVID actually came from. I mean, that would be untenable in a democracy, surely.
Yes, and I think there's a big concern. The big concern with the United States, so at the moment, as I say, it's not. There's no concrete suggestion. There's proposals by the United States, which are reforms to the IHR, but looking at those and suggesting that those might be supported by a number of major powers, including the UK and including the EU, quite separately, also to a certain extent they're accepted. The difficulty with those is that they give hugely enhanced powers to the Executive Committee, but also to the Director General himself. Now, as you said, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus is an ex-prime minister of Ethiopia who was indicted. He had no findings, but he's been indicted for war crimes before the ICC, the International Criminal Court, for what he did in Ethiopia during his reign. Yeah. And as you rightly said, he was put in that position under the considerable influence of China, the People's Republic of China, which, first of all, probably is responsible for this pandemic, because probably it looks like this was a leak from Wuhan, not necessarily deliberate, but nevertheless a leak, covered it up with the WHO's assistance. And then when the WHO discovered it, the WHO suddenly decided, against all its own recommendations, including from October 2019, to recommend lockdowns following the Chinese model, the totalitarian Chinese model across the whole of the world. So the difficulty I have with this treaty is any treaty that gives an unaccountable, a person appointed through processes that are almost as opaque as the conclave in the Vatican to be appointed, and gives him powers, because you can see the underlinings and the crossings out and the new text in the report by the United States, and this recommendation by the United States, which directly give him particular powers of investigation.
Not on our watch, I think we can safely say, Francis. It's bad enough being locked down by elected officials in my own country, but it's quite another, and I'm never going to agree to that again. We will be fighting that till the end of time, I'm sure. But the idea that some unelected official, let's say appointed effectively by the Chinese government, are going to have a say over whether I can or can't, visit my mum or something, or go to work. I mean, not a chance. I have to say, this is something we're going to have to fight against, because it's going to be sort of casually brought in, oh, don't worry about it, and then we will lose those powers to have a say about what happens to us. Francis Hoar, you've been a valiant fighter of all these issues. Public law barrister Francis Hoar, thank you very much indeed.